Hidden Deep Within, written by Kingston Murray. Trigger warning. This story contains themes or mentions of physical violence, gore, or abuse. I was sitting alone at my dining table when I got the call. It was from the police station of my hometown, a place I haven't been to in over 20 years. The man on the other side of the call told me that my father was dead. He wasn't able to explain in much detail other than the fact that my father was found dead in his apartment, and that it wasn't suspected to be a case of murder. I packed my suitcase with about 3 days' worth of clothing and toiletries, got in my car, and began the 8-hour drive back to my hometown. My father wasn't a perfect man, far from it actually. He had violent tendencies for as long as I could remember. Growing up, it wasn't uncommon to see him hit and throw around my mother. While she took care of me at home, he would go to work 6 times a week for about 9 hours per day. And when he got home, he was often in a bad mood, and would shout at, hit, or drag my mother around the house by her clothes and hair. I was never the target of his violence until my mother suddenly died from an illness when I was 12 years old. After that, he started to direct his actions towards me. For this reason, I stayed away from home as much as possible. I often stayed with friends or, out of desperation, stayed in the streets overnight to avoid his anger. This continued until I graduated high school, after which I immediately took all of my savings and left for a new life away from that town. Since then, I was able to get a low-paying job, get married, and have a son. Knowing I'd be gone for a few days, I gave my wife a call to let her know. It went straight to voicemail. I thought to myself I would try again later. When I arrived, the town seemed very familiar but worn down. It was a small town with a population of 500 back then when I was living there. Everyone knew each other. Thus, it felt more apt to call it a community rather than a town. From the look of the run-down buildings and unkempt streets, I could imagine that the population had dwindled significantly. From memory alone, I was able to navigate straight to the police station. When I arrived, I explained my situation and who I was. The person at the reception desk escorted me to the office of the chief of police and told me to wait a few minutes until he arrived. While waiting in his office, I read the name tag that was placed on the desk. Nelson Woodford. The name was extremely familiar to me, but I wasn't able to match it to a face from memory alone. A few minutes later, a man entered the room and greeted me. "Thanks for waiting. It's great to see you again, man," he said. After seeing his face, I immediately remembered who Nelson was. We knew each other in high school. He was a year below me, but always seemed to look up to me for some reason. He would often ask to hang out with me after school, and I would typically decline, as I preferred to go out with my close friends who were the same year as me. "It's great to see you again, Nelson," I said in an admittedly unexcited way. He'd grown to be very cool looking. He was tall, well built, and had a serious atmosphere to him. "First of all, I'd like to express my condolences to you. When I first heard that it was your father who passed, I told them to contact you immediately." "Thank you, but it's okay. We weren't exactly close." I see. I'll get straight to the point. The reason we called you here is to first explain the cause of death, and second, to gather some information from you to help our investigation." "Investigation? I thought you said you didn't suspect it was murder." "That's correct. Let me just explain. Over the last 2 years, people in this town have been dying in peculiar ways. Your father was the 5th case." "Peculiar ways?" "I'll now tell you the details of your father's death. I didn't want to explain it over the phone because I didn't think you'd believe us. A complaint was phoned into the station from one of your father's neighbors. They complained about a bad smell coming from the apartment, so we did a welfare check, and sure enough, it was a rotting, rancid smell. Sorry to explain it that way." "It's okay. Please continue." "Well, there was no response when we knocked, so we tried the door and it was open. We found him sitting in a chair in front of the TV. When we approached him, we found him dead. He had an outward-facing hole from his chest. It looked like something had burst out of it from the inside. On his lap, among various parts of him, we found an object. Okay. What was the object? It was a small wooden mallet. A wooden mallet? Strange, right? This is why we called you in. If you're not too uncomfortable with it, I'd like to show you some photos from the scene. After I agreed to the idea, Nelson handed over some printed photos. Sure enough, it was my father. He sat in a chair with his head leaned back, facing the ceiling. All color from his face was gone, and his dry eyes stared up in a frozen, agonized gaze. His mouth hung open with dried saliva, blood, and what appeared to be vomit staining his chin and lips. In the next photo, I saw what Nelson was talking about. The center of his chest had a giant hole in it, his skin bursting outwards as described. In the last photo, I saw what was in his lap. Various organs on his lap. With my limited medical knowledge, I could only guess that they were pieces of his heart, ribs, skin, and muscles, but it was a bloody, meaty mess. Laying amongst the mess was a bloody wooden mallet. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. To me, this seemed closer to a murder than a freak occurrence. While various thoughts were racing through my mind, Nelson cut in. I know it's hard to believe, but like I said, your father is the 5th case of this happening. The reason we know it's not murder, well, with the 2nd case, a man named Andrew Morris. It happened right in front of a prison guard. His chest burst open. A mallet came out of his chest? I asked. That's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. What kind of relationship would you say you had with your father growing up? What kind of relationship? It was complicated. I'm sorry, but what does that have to do with what happened? Well, when we looked into each of these cases, we found that the victims all had troubling stories. Skeletons in the closet, if you will. Some more obvious than others, but nevertheless, skeletons. I'm sorry, Nelson, but I have no idea what you're talking about. I just told you about Andrew Morris, yeah? What came out of his chest wasn't a mallet. It was an unmarked bottle of whiskey. It had no label. He was a known drunk. We put him away for 10 years for driving drunk and killing a man. Always had low participation in his rehabilitation circles, too. Bastard finished serving his sentence, and 2 weeks later crashed into a tree. At that time, his license was already revoked, but he didn't care. He went right back to confinement after that. A patrolling prison guard saw him die in his cell. Andrew was only the 2nd case, but the other 4 cases weren't all too different. First was Richard White, found dead in his car in front of Nancy's bar, hole in his chest. What came out of his chest was a tube of lipstick. With news of his death spreading around town, a few women came out and spoke against him. It turned out he was part of a sex trafficking ring that spread across the entire Midwest. He was out of town a lot on business. Victim number 3, Maury Clements. You remember him from school, right? Found dead in his apartment, hole in his chest. And what came out of his chest? A kid's fashion doll with no clothes. I'm sure you can imagine what we dug up on him after. The 4th victim, Glenn Morales, found dead in the park, hole in his chest, dozens of syringes found scattered on the floor next to him. We're still mid-investigation, but the syringes made us suspect he played a key role in the rise of drug-related homeless deaths around the area. Then, most recently, was your father. Do you see where I'm going with this? Everything Nelson told me sounded absurd. I couldn't believe what Nelson was trying to convey to me in that moment. So what? I inquired. These people did bad things, so their chests exploded. Is that what you want me to believe, Nelson? Yes and no. I'm a man who considers himself to be grounded in reality. I don't believe this to be some supernatural occurrence. I have to believe there's a logical reason behind these deaths. I don't have the answer yet. but the townspeople believe it. Just ask around and you'll see. Everyone's on edge. People are lining up at the confessional booth, admitting their wrongdoings. People are apologizing to each other. Everyone is scared. If you ask me, it's backwards and creepy. I don't know if this is the act of some vigilante taking justice into his own hands or what, but it's making this town act crazy. Nelson escorted me out of his office and back into the lobby of the police station. Thoughts raced through my head. The last 2 hours felt like a whirlwind, tossing me between reality and fiction. I didn't know what to believe, but I also didn't care. This doesn't affect me. I'm no longer a resident of this town. I'm no longer my father's son. That life was left behind me, and I have a new one now. As Nelson returned to his office, an officer in the lobby opened the front door to the police station for me. As I was exiting, the officer said to me, "It's not that they did bad things." "What?" I replied, caught off guard. None of them owned up to it. They either felt no remorse or refused to admit what they'd done. Call it God or call it the universe, I don't know. But denying the things you've done, lying to yourself, that's the quickest way to a road of suffering. And feeling no remorse, that's the quickest way to lose your humanity. I walked out of the station thinking about what he said. As I prepared to drive to my father's apartment to sort out his belongings, I decided to try calling my wife again. After a day like today, talking to her and my son was all that I wanted. Went straight to voicemail. I thought to myself I would try again later. They'll answer one day. I got into my car, put the keys into the ignition. Suddenly felt a strong sense of longing wash over me. I had a deep desire to see my wife and son again. I wanted to be with them, to hug them. I missed them more than ever. It felt like it had been years since I last saw them. How many years? This feeling of sadness welled up inside of me. It welled up to the point where it began to hurt. The tears began to gather at the bottom of my eyes. I closed them and let the sadness carry me. As it carried me, I began to feel a tightness from deep within my chest. And then I felt free. That was Hidden Deep Within, written by Kingston Murray, posted on reedsy.com. My name is Junnis of Buggus, and I'll be reading stories like this every week. If there's something you'd like for me to narrate, please throw it in a comment. We're just getting started, so I hope to see you next time. Thanks for listening.